The morning they locked me in my room was the morning we were supposed to bury my husband. I stood at my bedroom window, watching Scott's car disappear down Maple Street, leaving me behind like an old coat nobody wanted anymore. The lock clicked from the outside, a sound so small, so ordinary, yet it changed everything. Outside, the gardenias Robert planted 20 years ago swayed in the September breeze, and I wondered if anyone would water them while I was trapped in here. I wondered if anyone would remember that Robert loved gardenias because they reminded him of his mother's garden in Tennessee. Hello, my name is Dorothy Henshaw, and I live in Greenfield, a small town about 40 minutes outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'm 68 years old. I've lived in the same house on Oakwood Drive for 37 years. I taught myself to sew when Scott was a baby because we couldn't afford to buy him new clothes every time he grew. I still give sewing lessons twice a week in my living room. My husband Robert died 6 days ago. My son locked me in my bedroom this morning so I couldn't attend the funeral. I need to tell you how we got here. Scott wasn't always like this. That's what I keep telling myself, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to the silence of an empty house. He was a gentle boy once. I have a photograph somewhere Scott at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing he made for me at school. It's a picture of our family 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a brown rectangle that's supposed to be our house. He wrote, "I love Mom," in red crayon across the top. Robert and I weren't wealthy. Robert worked for Henderson Construction Company for 41 years, mostly on site, managing crews, checking materials, making sure things got done right. He came home every evening with dust in his hair and concrete on his boots. I worked part-time at the town library until Scott started middle school, then I stayed home and took in sewing projects. We saved everything we could. We drove the same car for 15 years. We never went on vacation. Every dollar went into Scott's college fund. Our house wasn't much to look at, a modest 2-story with blue siding that needed repainting and a front porch that creaked when you stepped on it. But the garden was beautiful. Robert made sure of that. He planted the gardenias himself, dug the beds for my roses, built raised boxes for tomatoes and herbs. On summer evenings, we'd sit on that creaky porch, drinking iced tea, watching fireflies, and Robert would say, "We did good, Dottie. Look at what we built." What we built wasn't just the garden. It was Scott's future. We sent him to Virginia Commonwealth University. Business administration. He was the first person in either of our families to go to college. Robert cried the day we dropped Scott off at the dorms, though he tried to hide it. I saw him wipe his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Scott met Megan during his junior year. She came from money, real money. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. When Scott brought her home for the first time, I noticed the way her eyes moved across our living room. Taking in the worn furniture, the outdated wallpaper, the photographs in discount store frames. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wore shoes that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that if Scott loved her, that was enough. But things changed after that visit. Scott started calling less. When he did call, the conversations felt rushed, obligatory. He graduated, got a job at a marketing firm in Richmond, married Megan in a ceremony we could barely afford to attend. The wedding was at some country club with white columns and waiters in tuxedos. Robert wore the same suit he'd worn to his own father's funeral. I wore a dress I made myself. Megan's mother looked at us like we were part of the catering staff. The distance grew wider. Scott and Megan bought a house in the West End, one of those new developments with identical lawns and homeowner association rules. They invited us over once. Megan served us wine in glasses so delicate I was afraid to hold them. She talked about their plans to expand the business, to invest in a franchise, to build wealth. Scott nodded along, using words like portfolio and equity that sounded foreign coming from the boy who used to help his father plant tomatoes. The breaking point, the first real crack, happened 3 years ago on Thanksgiving. We'd prepared everything. I spent 2 days cooking. Robert drove into town to buy Scott's favorite pie from the bakery on Mason Street. We set the table with our good dishes, the ones we only used for holidays. We waited. 6 o'clock became 7. 7 became 8. At 8:30, Scott called. "Sorry, Mom. Megan's parents invited us to their place. We're already here. Maybe we can stop by this weekend?" They never stopped by that weekend. Or the next. Robert didn't say much. He just cleared the table quietly, wrapped up the food, put everything away. But I saw something change in his eyes that night. A kind of resignation. A sadness that settled in and never quite left. "He's just busy building his life," I told Robert. "We raised him to be independent." Robert looked at me for a long moment. "There's a difference between independent and ashamed, Dottie." I didn't want to believe it. I made excuses. Scott was stressed with work. Megan had different traditions. They were young, starting their own family story. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I knew Robert was right. Scott had looked at his father's dusty boots and his mother's homemade dress and decided we didn't fit into the life he was building. Love is supposed to be returned, isn't it? You give, and somewhere along the way, that love comes back to you in different forms: gratitude, respect, presence. But I was learning something painful: a mother's love might be the most unreturned investment in the world. You pour everything into a child, and sometimes they grow up and walk away, embarrassed by the very hands that fed them. Robert got sick last winter. Heart failure. The doctor said it had been building for years: too much physical work, too much stress, not enough rest. He started getting tired more easily. He stopped working on the garden. Some days, he just sat on the porch, staring out at the gardenias, not saying much. I called Scott. I told him his father was sick. He said he'd visit soon. He didn't. I called again 2 weeks later. He said work was crazy. Maybe next month. Next month came and went. Robert never complained about it. He just got quieter. At night, I'd find him looking at old photographs: Scott as a baby, Scott's first day of school, Scott graduating college. He never said it out loud, but I knew what he was thinking: where did I lose my son? 6 days ago, at 3 in the morning, Robert woke me up. His breathing was wrong, shallow, labored. I called 911, but I knew. Somehow, I knew. He held my hand in the ambulance. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. At the hospital, they worked on him for 30 minutes before the doctor came out and told me what I already understood. Robert was gone. I called Scott from the hospital. He answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom? What's wrong?" "Your father died." Silence. Then, "Oh, okay. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure out arrangements." He hung up. The next morning, Scott showed up at the house with Megan. He looked tired but composed. He hugged me briefly, awkwardly. Then he started talking about funeral arrangements, about being practical, about how he'd handle everything, so I wouldn't have to stress. Something felt off about his efficiency, his eagerness to take control, but I was too numb to question it. 3 days later, I overheard him on the phone in Robert's study. The door was cracked open. I was walking past to get to the linen closet. What do you mean it's all in her name? The house, the accounts, everything? Dad didn't leave me anything? My blood went cold. I stood frozen in the hallway. There has to be a mistake. He wouldn't. We need to contest this. Can we contest it? I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. I went to my room and sat on the bed, shaking. Scott wasn't grieving. He was calculating. He'd come here looking for an inheritance, and he was angry that Robert had left everything to me. That night, Scott's demeanor changed. He became curt, almost hostile. When I asked him a question about the funeral flowers, he snapped at me. Megan stopped pretending to be sympathetic. They whispered to each other in corners, looking at me like I was an obstacle. The morning of the funeral, I woke up early. I put on the black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral 20 years ago. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun come up over Robert's garden, trying to prepare myself to say goodbye. Scott came downstairs at 7. He was already dressed in his suit. His face was hard, unreadable. "Mom, I need to talk to you." "Of course. What is it? You're not going to the funeral." I stared at him. "What?" "I've decided it's better if you stay home. You're too emotional. It wouldn't be appropriate." "Scott, he's my husband. And he's my father. I'm handling this. You need to stay here." Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to frighten me, and led me upstairs to my bedroom. I was too shocked to resist. He pushed me gently inside. "Scott, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting you from yourself, Mom. Just stay here. Rest. I'll be back after the service." The door closed. I heard the lock click. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. I went to the door and tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. No response. I heard his footsteps going downstairs. I heard the front door open and close. I heard his car start. And then silence. I went to the window and watched him drive away. To my husband's funeral. Without me. I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my son, the boy I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for. But it was. He'd locked his own mother in her room on the day of her husband's funeral because she was in the way of whatever he was planning. I sat there as morning turned to afternoon, staring at the gardenias through the window. And I realized something. I'd spent 38 years loving a child who had grown into a stranger. A stranger who saw me not as his mother, but as an inconvenience. An obstacle between him and money that wasn't his. Robert's voice echoed in my memory, something he'd said a few weeks before he died, during one of his clearer moments. "Promise me something, Dottie. Promise me you won't let anyone hurt you. Not even Scott. Especially not Scott." I hadn't understood it then. Now, locked in my own bedroom, I understood perfectly. This story isn't just about what my son did to me. It's about what I did next. It's about learning, at 68 years old, that love without boundaries is just another word for self-destruction. It's about discovering that sometimes, the people you'd die for are the ones you need to save yourself from. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to get through this day. This long, terrible day, locked in my room while they buried my husband without me. Outside, the gardenias kept blooming, indifferent to everything. Scott didn't come back until after dark. I'd spent the entire day in that room, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of Robert's absence in every creak of the floorboards. I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. I paced. I sat by the window. I looked at the photographs on my dresser. Robert and me on our wedding day, both of us so young we looked like children playing dress up. Scott as a baby in my arms, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. That baby was gone. The man who locked me in here was someone else entirely. Around 8 o'clock, I heard the front door open. Footsteps on the stairs. The lock turned. Scott stood in the doorway, loosening his tie. He looked tired. Not grief tired. Stress tired. "You can come out now," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I stood up slowly. My legs were stiff from sitting. "How was the funeral?" "Fine. People asked about you. I said you weren't feeling well." "You told them I was sick? Would you rather I told them the truth? That you were too unstable to attend your own husband's funeral?" The cruelty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't passive distance anymore. This was active contempt. "Scott, what is happening to you?" He laughed a short, bitter sound. "What's happening to me? Let me tell you what's happening, Mom. Dad left everything to you. The house, the savings, the life insurance. Everything. Like I don't exist. Like I didn't work my ass off to make something of myself." "You did make something of yourself. Your father and I were so proud." "Proud?" He stepped closer. "You were embarrassed. Both of you. You know how it felt bringing Megan here? Watching her see this dated little house with its shabby furniture? You think I didn't notice how Dad looked at her parents? Like some country bumpkin who didn't know which fork to use. That's not true. Your father never. He left me nothing, Mom. After everything I did, everything I achieved, he gave it all to you." I took a breath, steadied myself. "Scott, this house is our home. The savings are what we lived on. Your father wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. You're 68 years old. How long are you going to need it? 10 years? 15? And then what? It all goes to some charity? Some distant cousin?" The calculation in his eyes made my skin crawl. He was doing math, adding up years, waiting for me to die. "This is my inheritance," he continued. "I'm your only child. This should come to me. It will. Eventually. But right now, I need it now, Mom. Megan and I have debts. We invested in a franchise opportunity, and it's not going the way we planned. We need capital." There it was. The real reason. Not grief. Not love. Money. "I'm sorry you're having financial troubles, but I can't just give you." "Can't? Or won't?" His face hardened. "You know what I think? I think you're being selfish. Hoarding money you don't even need while your own son is struggling." "Scott, please. No. You listen to me." He moved closer, and I instinctively stepped back. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to see Dad's lawyer next week. You're going to sign everything over to me. The house, the accounts, all of it." "I can't do that." "Yes, you can. You just don't want to." "Scott, this is my home. My security. I can't." He grabbed my wrist. Not violently, but firm enough to frighten me. His grip was cold. "You have 1 week to think about it, Mom. 1 week to decide whether you want to keep this house or keep your son. You're not giving me a choice." "Sure I am. Choose wisely." He let go of my wrist and walked out. I heard him go downstairs. I heard him talking to Megan in low voices. I heard the front door close. The car started. They left. I stood there in my bedroom, rubbing my wrist where his fingers had been. And I realized something terrifying. I was alone in this house with a son who saw me as an obstacle. A son who'd already proven he was willing to lock me in a room. What else was he willing to do? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept thinking about that look in Scott's eyes, cold, determined, calculating. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. The next morning, I called my friend Eleanor Hill. She lives 3 houses down, has known me for 20 years. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't crazy, someone who could tell me I wasn't imagining things. Dottie, I'm so sorry about Robert. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I heard you were too ill to attend yourself. Eleanor, can you come over? I need to talk to you. She came within 15 minutes, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil. I brought tuna casserole. I know it's not much, but I started crying the moment she stepped through the door. Not delicate tears, ugly, gasping sobs that I'd been holding in for days. She set down the casserole and held me while I fell apart in my own foyer. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. The lock, the threats, Scott's cold arithmetic about my remaining years. Eleanor's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, fear. Finally, she said, "You need to call the police. He's my son. He's a man who locked you in a room and threatened you. If I call the police, I lose him forever. Dottie, I say this with love, you already lost him. The question is whether you're going to lose yourself trying to get him back." But I couldn't do it. I couldn't call the police on my own child. Instead, I did something else. I called Mr. Lewis, Robert's lawyer. James Lewis had handled Robert's will. He was 63, methodical, kind. He'd been a friend of Robert's for years. I called his office and explained that I needed to understand exactly what Robert had left, exactly what my legal standing was. "Mrs. Henshaw, I'm glad you called. Can you come to my office tomorrow? There's something your husband wanted me to share with you. Something he left specifically for this situation." What situation? He anticipated there might be complications regarding Scott. My hands were shaking when I hung up. Robert knew. Somehow, even in those final weeks when he was getting sicker and quieter, he'd known this would happen. He'd prepared for it. That afternoon, Scott came back. He didn't knock. He used his key and walked right in. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, trying to keep my hands busy. He stood in the doorway, watching me. "Have you thought about what I said?" "Scott, I spoke with your father's lawyer. There's going to be a formal reading of the will. I know what the will says. I want you to change it. I can't just." "Yes, you can. People do it all the time. You transfer the property to me, and we'll take care of you. Megan and I, you can live here as long as you need, but legally, it'll be mine." "And if I refuse?" His jaw tightened. "Then I guess we'll find out how hard it is for an old woman to live alone in a house this big. Accidents happen, Mom. Furnaces break. Pipes freeze. It's a lot of maintenance for someone your age." The threat was clear. He wasn't going to physically hurt me, he was too smart for that. But he could make my life miserable. He could make this house, the home Robert and I built together, into a prison. "Get out," I said quietly. "What? Get out of my house. This is my house. It should be my house. Your father left it to me. It's my house. And I'm asking you to leave." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. His face flushed red. His fists clenched. But then something shifted. He stepped back. "Fine. But this isn't over. You have until the reading of the will to make the right choice. If you don't..." He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. After he left, I went upstairs to Robert's study. He'd kept it neat, organized files, labeled boxes, everything in its place. I sat at his desk and opened the drawers, looking for, I don't know what, answers, guidance, something to tell me what to do. In the bottom drawer, tucked under a folder of tax returns, I found an envelope. My name was written on it in Robert's careful handwriting, for Dorothy. To be opened if Scott becomes what I fear. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written on Robert's yellow legal pad in the same careful script. Dear Dottie, if you're reading this, then I was right. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that when I was gone, Scott would step up and be the son we raised him to be. But I've seen the way he looks at things lately. The way he talks about money. The way he talks about you. He's changed, Dottie. The boy who drew you pictures is gone. I don't know if Megan changed him or if this was always in him, waiting to come out. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is this: you are not responsible for fixing him. You gave him everything: love, education, opportunity. If he chooses to be cruel, that's his choice, not your failure. Do not give him the house. Do not give him the savings. I left everything to you because I want you protected. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. Let me take care of you now. Scott needs to learn that love is not something you can inherit like property. It's something you earn every day through how you treat people. If he learns that lesson, he'll come back to you as a real son. If he doesn't, then you're better off without him. I know that sounds harsh. I know you'll want to give in, to fix this, to make peace. But Dottie, sometimes peace costs too much. Sometimes the price of peace is your own dignity. Don't pay that price. Not even for our son. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. These 40 years with you were worth everything. Take care of yourself. Please. For me. Always. Robert. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. I sat there in Robert's chair, in his study, surrounded by his careful organization and his quiet love, and I understood what he was telling me. He was giving me permission. Permission to say no. Permission to protect myself. Permission to let Scott face the consequences of his own choices. But understanding it and doing it were 2 different things. Scott was still my son. That baby I'd held, that boy who drew me pictures, that teenager I'd stayed up late helping with homework, he was still in there somewhere, wasn't he? If I just held on long enough, if I just loved him enough, maybe he'd come back. Eleanor's words echoed in my head, you already lost him. But Robert's letter said something different. It said, if he learns that lesson, he'll come back to you as a real son. There was still hope, but the hope required me to do something I'd never done before. It required me to stand firm. To say no. To let my son hit bottom and not catch him. Could I do that? Could I watch my own child suffer and not intervene? The reading of the will was in 4 days. 4 days to decide whether I was strong enough to follow Robert's final wish. 4 days to figure out if I could be the kind of mother who loved her son enough to let him fail. I looked at Robert's photograph on the desk, him in his work clothes, smiling at the camera, dust in his hair. He'd spent his whole life building things. Houses, gardens, a family. And now he was asking me to do the hardest building of all, to build a boundary. To construct a wall between myself and my son, not to keep him out forever, but to teach him that walls exist for a reason. Outside, the sun was setting. The gardenias were blooming. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But I knew better now. I knew that underneath the surface of every peaceful thing, there were roots, deep, tangled roots that held everything together or pulled everything apart. I just had to decide which kind of roots I was going to put down. 4 days until I found out if I was strong enough to be the mother my son needed instead of the mother he wanted. The morning of the will reading, I woke up at 5 and couldn't fall back asleep. I lay in bed watching the ceiling turn from gray to pale blue as dawn broke. My mind kept circling back to the same question: what kind of mother lets her son destroy himself? But another voice, Robert's voice, maybe, or maybe my own, answered, what kind of mother lets her son destroy her? I got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking out at Robert's garden. The tomatoes needed picking. The roses needed deadheading. The gardenias were still blooming, defiant and beautiful. Robert would have been out there already, moving quietly between the plants, talking to them the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. "Tell them what you need," he used to say. "Plants are honest. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen." I wished people were that simple. At 9 o'clock, I drove to Mr. Lewis' office on Harrison Street. The building was old brick, 3 stories, with a law firm on each floor. His office was on the 2nd floor, modest but comfortable. Dark wood furniture. Bookshelves lined with legal texts. A window overlooking the courthouse across the street. Scott and Megan were already there when I arrived. They sat in the waiting room, Megan scrolling through her phone, Scott staring at nothing. He looked up when I walked in. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. Neither did I. Mr. Lewis' secretary, a woman named Patricia who'd worked for him for 30 years, gave me a sympathetic look. "He'll be ready in just a moment, Mrs. Henshaw. Can I get you some coffee?" "No, thank you." I sat across from Scott and Megan. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Megan kept scrolling. Scott kept staring. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Finally, Patricia stood. "Mr. Lewis will see you now." We filed into his office. Mr. Lewis stood behind his desk, tall, gray-haired, wearing a navy suit that had seen better days. He shook my hand, nodded to Scott and Megan, then gestured for us to sit. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time." He settled into his chair, opened a folder. "I'll begin with the formal reading of Robert Henshaw's last will and testament." The legal language washed over me. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. I watched Scott's face instead. Watched the way his jaw tightened when Mr. Lewis mentioned the house. Watched his hands clench when Mr. Lewis listed the bank accounts. "To my wife, Dorothy Henshaw, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to our home at 247 Oakwood Drive, all savings and checking accounts, my life insurance policy, and all personal property. It is my wish that she be provided for completely and without restriction." Silence. Then Scott exploded. "This is bullshit." Mr. Lewis didn't flinch. "I understand you're upset." "Upset? I'm his son. His only child. And he left me nothing? There's a provision for you, actually. A personal letter and a sum of $5,000 to be released." $5,000? Scott stood up, his chair scraping back. "That's it? $5,000 while she gets hundreds of thousands?" "Scott, please sit down," Mr. Lewis said calmly. "There's more." "More what? More ways my father decided to screw me over?" "There's a video." That stopped him. He sat slowly. "What video?" Mr. Lewis turned his laptop around. On the screen was Robert, sitting in what I recognized as Mr. Lewis' conference room. The date stamp said 3 weeks before he died. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. Mr. Lewis pressed play. Robert's voice filled the room. "Hi, Scott. If you're watching this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry I can't be there to say this in person, but maybe it's better this way. Maybe you'll actually listen." Scott's face had gone pale. "I'm leaving everything to your mother because she earned it. Not through work, though she worked plenty. She earned it by staying. By loving me when I was difficult. By building a life with me brick by brick, year by year. By never asking for more than I could give." Robert paused, took a breath. "I know you're angry. I know you think this is unfair. But son, fairness isn't about equal distribution. It's about taking care of the people who took care of you. Your mother took care of me for 40 years. She took care of you for 38. What have you given her lately besides disappointment? Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I'm not punishing you, Scott. I'm protecting her. From you. I've seen the way you look at her now. Like she's an investment that didn't pan out. Like she's an embarrassment. Do you know how that feels? Watching your son be ashamed of the people who sacrificed everything for him? Robert's voice cracked slightly. You used to be such a good kid. You used to draw your mom pictures. You used to help me in the garden. What happened to that boy? Where did he go? Scott was staring at the screen, his jaw working like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Here's what I hope happens, Robert continued. I hope you take this as a wake-up call. I hope you realize that money doesn't make you rich, relationships do. I hope you figure out that losing your mother's respect is a bigger loss than any inheritance. And I hope, someday, you come back to her as the son she deserves. Not the one you've become. The video paused. Robert's face froze on the screen, looking directly at the camera. At Scott. Mr. Lewis cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Robert left specific instructions that if Scott contests the will or attempts to coerce Dorothy into changing it, the $5,000 will be donated to charity, and he will be permanently excluded from any future inheritance. Scott sat motionless. His face had gone from pale to red. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. This is manipulation, Megan said finally. You can't do this. There are laws. The will is ironclad, Mr. Lewis said. I wrote it myself. Robert was of sound mind. He knew exactly what he was doing. Scott stood abruptly. He was dying. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was perfectly lucid. I have documentation from 3 doctors confirming his mental competency at the time of signing. Then he was influenced. Scott pointed at me, she poisoned him against me. Scott, I said quietly. I didn't even know about the will until after your father died. Liar. You manipulated him. That's enough, Mr. Lewis cut in. You're upset. I understand. But making accusations won't change anything. The will stands. Scott turned to me. The look on his face was pure hatred. You did this. You turned him against me. Your father made his own choices. Choices you influenced. Choices you. Stop. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Your father loved you. Everything he did was because he loved you. Including this. This isn't love. This is punishment. No, Scott. Punishment would have been leaving you nothing with no explanation. Your father gave you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he grabbed Megan's arm. We're leaving. We're going to fight this. You're going to what? I stood up, facing him. Contest a will that your father made while sound of mind? Harass a widow? Is that who you are now? I'm someone who won't let himself be cheated. You're not being cheated. You're being taught. There's a difference. He laughed a harsh, ugly sound. Taught? You think I need lessons from a woman who spent her whole life sewing other people's clothes? The words hit like a slap. But I didn't flinch. Yes, I do. Because at least I know the value of something I made with my own hands. Scott's face twisted. Screw this. Screw all of this. He turned to Mr. Lewis. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I look forward to it, Mr. Lewis said calmly. Scott stormed out. Megan followed, throwing me a venomous look over her shoulder. The door slammed behind them. Silence filled the office. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Lewis stood and poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on his credenza. He handed me one. Sit, Dorothy. Please. I sat, drank. The water was cold and real and helped ground me. That was incredibly brave, he said. I don't feel brave. I feel like I just lost my son. You didn't lose him. You set a boundary. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks the same. Mr. Lewis sat on the edge of his desk, a kind expression on his face. Robert and I talked a lot in those final weeks. He was clear-headed about what was happening with Scott. He saw it long before you did. Why didn't he tell me? He did, in his way. But you weren't ready to hear it. You were still hoping Scott would change on his own. I looked down at my hands. Wedding ring still on my finger. 40 years of marriage reduced to a thin gold band. Robert wanted me to give you something else, Mr. Lewis said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out another envelope. He wrote this the day before he died. He was very weak by then, but he insisted. I took the envelope. My name on the front in shaky handwriting, barely legible. Read it when you're ready, Mr. Lewis said. And Dorothy? You're stronger than you know. You just proved that. I drove home in a daze. The streets of Greenfield passed by familiar houses, familiar trees, the same route I'd driven 1,000 times. But everything felt different, sharper, more real. At home, I sat in Robert's chair in his study and opened the second letter. Dottie, I'm so tired. It's hard to hold the pen. But I need to say this. I'm sorry I'm leaving you alone. I'm sorry you have to face Scott without me. But I know you can do it. You're stronger than you think. Here's what I learned: sometimes love means holding on. Sometimes it means letting go. With you, I held on with everything I had. With Scott, we have to let go. Let him fall. Let him fail. It's the only way he'll learn to stand. Don't feel guilty. You didn't fail as a mother. Scott is making his own choices. Bad choices. Selfish choices. Those are his to own, not yours. I wish I could be there to see what happens next. I hope Scott comes back to you. I hope he learns. But even if he doesn't, you'll be okay. You've always been okay. You've always been enough. Thank you for 40 years. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being you. All my love. Robert. I cried then. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. Not just for Robert, though I missed him with an ache that felt physical. Not just for Scott, though losing him felt like losing a limb. I cried for all of it, for the family we'd been, for the family we'd never be again, for the innocence of believing that love was enough. When I was empty, wrung out, I sat in the silence of the house and listened. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, birds sang in the garden. Life continued. Even when it felt like it shouldn't, it did. I thought about what came next. Scott would probably try to contest the will, though Mr. Lewis seemed confident it wouldn't work. Megan would probably push him to fight harder, meaner. The next few months would be ugly. But I had Robert's letters. I had his love, even in death. I had this house, this garden, these years of memories that no one could take from me. And I had something else. Something new. Something I'd never had before. I had permission to say no. Over the next few days, Scott called 17 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails, each one angrier than the last. I deleted them without listening all the way through. He showed up at the house twice. I didn't open the door. Eleanor came by every day, bringing food, keeping me company. My sewing students Lucy, Beatrice, Carmen, Estella sent cards and flowers. They rallied around me in a way that reminded me I had family beyond blood. A week after the will reading, I was in the garden pulling weeds when I heard a car pull up. I looked up, expecting Scott. But it was Megan. Alone. She got out of the car slowly, hesitantly. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, the first time I'd ever seen her without perfect hair and makeup. She looked tired. Smaller, somehow. "Mrs. Henshaw, can we talk?" I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "About what?" "About Scott. About everything." I studied her face, looking for manipulation, for angles. But all I saw was exhaustion. "5 minutes," I said. She nodded, followed me to the porch. We sat in the chairs where Robert and I used to drink iced tea and watch fireflies. "Scott doesn't know I'm here," she said. "Why are you here?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I think you might be the only person who can help him. And I don't know if I can stay if he doesn't get help." I waited. "The franchise failed," she continued. "We're $60,000 in debt. My parents cut us off. He's been falling apart. He can't sleep. He can't eat. All he talks about is the will, about how unfair it is, about how he deserves." She stopped, looked at me. "He doesn't deserve it, does he?" "No," I said simply. "He doesn't." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought if we just had money, everything would be perfect. I thought that's what mattered. But watching him these past 2 weeks, I don't know who he is anymore. He's a man who needs to learn what his father tried to teach him. And you won't help him? You won't give him anything? Giving him money now would be the cruelest thing I could do." She wiped her eyes. "I don't understand. I know you don't. But someday, maybe you will." Megan stood. "I came here to ask you to help us. To give Scott a loan, or the house, or something. But I see now that's not what he needs." "What does he need?" "I think he needs to lose everything. I think he needs to hit bottom." She looked at me with something like respect. "And I think you know that. That's why you're doing this." "I'm doing this because his father asked me to. And because I love my son enough to let him fail." She nodded slowly. Then she got in her car and drove away. I sat on the porch until the sun set, thinking about choices. About love. About the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Somewhere across town, my son was falling apart. Every motherly instinct in me screamed to go to him, to fix it, to make it better. But Robert's voice was louder. "Let him fall. It's the only way he'll learn to stand." So I stayed where I was. In the house we built. In the garden he planted. Holding the line between love and sacrifice, between giving and giving up. And I wondered if Scott would ever understand that this refusal to save him was the greatest act of love I'd ever given him. I didn't hear from Scott for 3 weeks after Megan's visit. I tried to focus on other things. I reopened my sewing classes. Lucy, Beatrice, Carmen, and Estella came back, and we fell into our old rhythm fabric spread across my dining room table, the hum of sewing machines. The quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful from scraps. Eleanor stopped by most afternoons. We'd sit in the garden, drinking tea, not talking about Scott but both thinking about him. I started sleeping better. The house felt like mine again. I watered Robert's tomatoes. I deadheaded the roses. I lived. But I thought about Scott every day. Every time the phone rang. Every time a car passed on the street. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the garden, picking the last of the tomatoes before the first frost, when I heard shouting from inside the house. My front door locked. I was sure I'd locked it banged open. "Mom, where are you?" Scott's voice. Rough. Desperate. I stood up, tomatoes spilling from my basket. He appeared at the back door, and I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung loose. His hair was unwashed. Dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Scott, what are you? We need to talk. Now. You can't just barge into my house. My house. This should be my house. He stumbled down the back steps. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. Was he drunk? On something? Scott, have you been drinking? What does it matter? Everything's falling apart anyway. He moved toward me. I stepped back, my heel catching on the edge of the garden bed. I caught myself on the fence post. The business is gone, he said. Completely gone. We filed for bankruptcy yesterday. The franchise company is suing us. Megan's parents won't return our calls. We're losing the house. Everything is gone. I'm sorry. Are you? Are you really? He laughed, that same harsh sound from the lawyer's office. Because you could fix this. You could save us. But you won't. Scott, I can't. Can't or won't? Which is it, Mom? Because I keep hearing, can't, but what I see is someone who has plenty and won't share. Your father left me that money to live on. To survive. You don't need all of it. You don't need this big house. You could downsize. You could give me half. Just half. That would be enough to. Enough to what? Dig yourself deeper? Start another business you're not ready for? His face flushed red. I'm not ready? I went to college. I worked my ass off. And then you forgot where you came from. You forgot the people who got you there. I didn't forget. I just wanted better. Is that so wrong? Wanting better than this? He gestured at the house, the garden, everything. Wanting better than a father who came home covered in dust and a mother who sewed other people's clothes for pocket change. The words hung in the air between us. Everything he'd been thinking for years, finally said out loud. There it is, I said quietly. That's what you really think. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. You've thought it for years. We embarrassed you. Our small house, our simple life, our working class existence. We weren't good enough for your new life. That's not. Your father knew. That's why he wrote what he wrote. That's why he left things the way he did. He saw what you'd become. Scott's hands were shaking. What I'd become. I became successful. I became something. I got out of this nowhere town and made something of myself. And lost yourself in the process. Don't. His voice broke. Don't act like you're better than me. Don't act like poverty is noble. It's not. It's just poverty. We were never poor, Scott. We had everything that mattered. To you, maybe. Not to me. Never to me. We stared at each other across Robert's tomato plants. My son. My stranger. Megan left, he said finally. 2 days ago. She took whatever we had left and went back to her parents. Filed for divorce yesterday. Oh, Scott, don't. Don't pity me. I don't want your pity. I want what I'm owed. You're not owed anything. I'm your son. Then act like it. The words came out louder than I intended. Act like a son instead of a creditor. Act like family instead of a business partner calculating return on investment. He stepped closer. Too close. I could smell alcohol on his breath now. Definitely drunk. You want me to act like a son? Fine. Sons inherit. Sons get what their parents built. Sons respect their mothers. Sons show up. Sons don't lock their grieving mothers in bedrooms on the day of their father's funeral. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Same grip as before. Same cold pressure. Let go of me. Not until you listen. Let go or I'm calling the police. He released me like I'd burned him. Stepped back. You'd really do that? Call the cops on your own son? If I have to. We stood there, breathing hard, facing each other like opponents. This wasn't a mother and son anymore. This was something else. Something broken. I have nothing, he said. His voice cracked. I have no wife, no business, no money, no home. I'm living in a motel on Route 7. I'm 38 years old and I have nothing. You have your life. You have your health. You have the ability to start over. With what? I'm broke. I'm worse than broke, I'm in debt. I can't even afford a security deposit on an apartment. Then get a job. Any job. Start at the bottom like your father did. I'm not my father. No, you're not. Robert would never have grabbed my arm like that. He would never have locked me in a room. He would never have looked at me the way you're looking at me right now. Something in Scott's expression shifted. Shame, maybe, or anger at being ashamed. What do you want from me? I want you to take responsibility. I want you to stop blaming everyone else for your choices. I want you to look in the mirror and see what you've become. And what have I become? Someone I don't recognize. He flinched like I'd hit him. Well, that makes two of us. Because I don't recognize you either. The mom I knew would have helped. Would have given anything to save her son. That mom enabled you. That mom made excuses for you. That mom loved you so much she couldn't see what you needed. And what do I need? To fail. Completely. To lose everything. To hit bottom so hard you can't deny it anymore. I am at bottom. No, you're not. You're still here, still demanding, still expecting someone to save you. Bottom is when you finally accept that no one's coming. That you have to save yourself. His face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the little boy again. The one who drew me pictures. The one who cried when his goldfish died. I can't do this alone, he whispered. Every instinct in me screamed to go to him. To hold him. To tell him it would be okay. To write him a check and fix everything like I'd fixed scraped knees and bad grades and broken friendships. But Robert's voice, let him fall. Yes, you can, I said. You can do hard things. You just forgot how. Please. Tears on his face now. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. Just enough to get back on my feet. Just a loan. I'll pay you back. I promise. No, just no? Your son is homeless and you say no? You're not homeless. You're in a motel. You can get a job. You can rebuild. But not with my money. This is insane. You're being cruel. I'm being what your father asked me to be. I'm protecting you from yourself. By letting me suffer? By letting you learn. He wiped his face roughly. You know what? Forget it. Forget all of it. I don't need you. I don't need this house. I don't need any of it. Scott, no. You made your choice. You chose Dad's money over your own son. Fine. Live with it. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. The threat hung in the air. The same calculation I'd seen before. Waiting for me to die. Hoping I'd die. Resenting that I was still here. Get out, I said. Gladly. He turned and stormed through the garden, trampling the tomato plants Robert had so carefully staked. I heard him slam through the house. Heard the front door bang. Heard his car start. Then silence. I stood there in the ruins of the tomato plants, shaking, and realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Angry at what Scott had become. Angry at what he'd thrown away. Angry at the waste of it all, the love, the sacrifice, the years we'd poured into him. But underneath the anger was something else. Something harder to name. Grief. I was grieving my son while he was still alive. Grieving the child he'd been. Grieving the man I'd hoped he'd become. Grieving the relationship we'd never have. Eleanor found me an hour later, still standing in the garden. She didn't ask what happened. She just took my arm and led me inside. Made me tea. Sat with me while I stared at nothing. He came, I said finally. I saw his car. I almost called the police. He asked for money. Of course he did. I said no. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Good. It didn't feel good. It felt terrible. The right thing usually does. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "You know what the worst part of being a parent is?" "What?" "Realizing that you can do everything right and your kids can still turn out wrong. Not because you failed. Because they made their own choices." Did I do everything right? No one does. But you loved him. You gave him everything you had. That's not nothing. It wasn't enough. Maybe it was too much. Maybe that's the problem. I thought about that. About all the times I'd made excuses for Scott. Covered for him. Bailed him out. Protected him from consequences. Maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe my love had been too much. Too soft. Too forgiving. What if he doesn't come back? I asked. Then he doesn't. And you'll survive. You'll be sad, but you'll survive. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think. Stronger than he thinks. That's why this scares him so much. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. The look on Scott's face. The hatred. The desperation. The threat about leaving me alone when I was old and sick. I got up and went to Robert's study. Read his letters again. Both of them. Let him fall. It's the only way he'll learn to stand. You didn't fail as a mother. Scott is making his own choices. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to trust that Robert knew what he was doing, that this was the right path. But sitting alone in the dark, in the house we'd built together, missing my husband and losing my son, I wasn't sure I was strong enough to see it through. The phone rang. 3 in the morning. I picked it up without thinking. Heavy breathing. Then, "Mom?" Scott's voice. Slurred. Definitely drunk. "Scott, where are you?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why? You made it clear you don't care what happens to me." "That's not true." "Then prove it. Give me what I need. What I deserve." "You need help, Scott. Professional help. Not money." Silence. "Then, you're really going to let me destroy myself?" "No, I'm going to let you save yourself." "Same thing." "No, it's not. But you have to figure that out on your own." More silence. Then the line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, tears streaming down my face, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Please. Please let this be right. Please let him survive this. Please let him come back. But prayers are just words in the dark. They don't change reality. They don't make hard things easier. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if a mother's love could be strong enough to let go. Wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Wondering if, when Scott hit bottom, there would be anything left of him to save. Outside, the first frost of the season was settling over the garden, turning everything white and cold and beautiful and dead. I didn't hear from Scott for 2 months after that phone call. November passed. Then December. The garden went dormant. The gardenias stopped blooming. I wrapped Robert's rose bushes in burlap to protect them from the frost. I cleaned out the garage. I reorganized closets. I kept my hands busy because my mind wouldn't stop. Every day I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Every night I lay awake imagining worst-case scenarios. Scott homeless. Scott sick. Scott giving up entirely. The maternal part of me that had spent 38 years protecting him screamed that I should call, should check, should help. But I didn't. Eleanor came by often during those weeks. She'd sit with me in the kitchen, drinking coffee, not saying much. Just being present. My sewing students rallied around me too. Lucy brought soup. Beatrice brought flowers. Carmen and Estella took turns inviting me to lunch. They didn't pry. They didn't judge. They just held space for my grief. Because I was grieving. Not the way I'd grieved Robert, that was a clean loss, final and complete. This was messier. Mourning someone who was still alive. Someone who might come back or might not. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Christmas came. I put up a small tree, more out of habit than desire. I hung the ornaments Scott had made as a child: popsicle stick frames, construction paper stars, a clay handprint from kindergarten. I stood there looking at these relics of his innocence and cried until I had nothing left. On Christmas morning, I went to Robert's grave. The cemetery was quiet, covered in a thin layer of snow. I brushed the snow off his headstone and sat on the cold ground beside it. I don't know if I'm doing this right, I told him. I don't know if you can hear me. But I'm trying. I'm trying to do what you asked. It's so hard, Robert. Harder than anything I've ever done. The wind moved through the bare trees. A cardinal landed on a branch nearby, brilliant red against the gray sky. I miss you. I miss having someone to talk to about all this. Someone who knew Scott the way I did. Someone who loved him the way I do. I wiped my eyes. I hope you're right. I hope this works. Because right now, it just feels like I'm losing everything. I stayed there for an hour, talking to Robert, talking to myself, talking to the cold air. When I finally left, I felt lighter somehow. Not better, exactly. Just less alone. The call came on a Tuesday in January. I was hemming a dress for Lucy when the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Henshaw? A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. Yes? This is Rebecca Morris from Riverside Regional Hospital. Your son, Scott Henshaw, was brought in this morning. You're listed as his emergency contact. My heart stopped. Is he? He's stable, but he collapsed at a convenience store. Malnutrition and dehydration. We'd like you to come down if possible. I drove to the hospital in a fog. My hands shook on the steering wheel. All those nightmare scenarios flooding back. This was it. This was the bottom Robert had talked about. The hospital was 20 minutes away but felt like hours. I parked in the visitor lot and sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. Then I went inside. Scott was in a room on the 3rd floor. The nurse outside gave me a sympathetic look before letting me in. He looked terrible, worse than when I'd seen him in October. He'd lost even more weight. His skin was grayish. IV lines ran into his arm. His eyes were closed. I sat in the chair beside his bed and just looked at him. My baby. My son. This broken man who'd once drawn me pictures in red crayon. After a few minutes, his eyes opened. He saw me. Something flickered across his face: shame, maybe, or relief, or both. Hi, Mom. Hi, baby. Silence. The machines beeped steadily. I'm sorry, he said finally. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. For what? All of it. Everything. The funeral. The things I said. The way I treated you. I waited. This wasn't the time for easy forgiveness. Not yet. I lost everything, he continued. The business. Megan. The house. I've been living in my car for the past 3 weeks. I couldn't afford the motel anymore. My heart broke. But I didn't speak. I got a job, he said. At a warehouse. Loading trucks. Minimum wage. It's not much, but it's something. I was trying. I really was trying. He closed his eyes. I just couldn't eat and pay off the debt at the same time. So I chose the debt. Why? Because it was mine. My responsibility. My mess. He looked at me. You were right. About everything. Dad was right. I was so angry at both of you for so long. But you were right. Tears on his face now. I drove past the house last week. Just to see it. The gardenias are dormant, but I remembered Dad planting them. I remembered helping him. I was 7, maybe 8. He let me dig the holes. I thought I was so grown up, helping my dad with real work. He wiped his eyes roughly. When did I stop seeing that as valuable? When did I start thinking that working with your hands was somehow less than working in an office? When did I become so ashamed of where I came from? I don't know, Scott. Megan's getting remarried. To some guy her parents approve of. Some investment banker. She sent me the announcement. I think she wanted to hurt me. But all I could think was she never loved me. She loved what she thought I could become. And I spent years trying to become that instead of being myself. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry I grabbed your arm. Both times. I'm sorry I locked you in your room. I'm sorry I called you disgusting. I'm sorry I trampled Dad's tomatoes. I'm sorry for all of it. Are you sorry because you lost everything? Or are you sorry because you understand what you did was wrong? He looked at me for a long moment. The second one. I think. I hope. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. Thin. But it was my son's hand. I forgive you. He started crying. Really crying. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. I stood and held him while he sobbed. My baby. My broken baby. When he finally calmed down, I sat back down. What happens now? I don't know. They want to keep me here a few days. Get my nutrition levels back up. After that, he shrugged. I still have the warehouse job. I'm still in debt. I'm still basically homeless. You can come home. He looked at me, startled. What? You can come stay with me. For a while. Until you get back on your feet. Mom, I can't. There are conditions. He waited. You keep the warehouse job. You pay off your debts yourself. I won't bail you out. You go to counseling. And if you ever speak to me the way you did in October, you leave. Immediately. No second chances. That's fair. And you help me with the garden. The roses need pruning. The beds need turning. Your father's tomatoes need replanting come spring. Something softened in his face. I can do that. Okay then. He squeezed my hand. Thank you. For not giving up on me. For not giving me money when I demanded it. For being strong enough to let me fall. Your father taught me that. He was a smart man. Yes, he was. That was 6 months ago. Scott moved into his old bedroom. It felt strange at first, having him back in the house. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers learning to share space. But slowly, things settled into a rhythm. He worked at the warehouse 5 days a week. Came home tired, dusty, wearing work boots that reminded me of Robert. He started seeing a therapist every Thursday. He set up a payment plan for his debts it would take years to pay off, but he was chipping away at it. And he worked in the garden. Every weekend, he'd be out there pruning, weeding, planting. He rebuilt the tomato beds he'd destroyed. He learned to deadhead roses. He talked to the plants the way Robert used to, and sometimes I'd watch from the kitchen window and cry at the resemblance. We didn't talk about the past much. There wasn't much point. We both knew what had happened. We both carried the scars. The question now was whether we could build something new from the ruins. One Saturday in April, I found Scott at Robert's grave. I'd gone to put flowers there and saw his car in the cemetery parking lot. I almost left, gave him privacy. But something made me walk over. He was sitting cross-legged in front of the headstone, reading something. As I got closer, I saw it was one of Robert's letters, the one from the lawyer's office. I come here every week, he said without looking up. I read this every time. To remind myself. Of what? That I had a father who loved me enough to tell me the truth. Even when it hurt. Even when he knew I'd hate him for it. He folded the letter carefully. I did hate him. For months. But he was right. About everything. I sat down beside him. The ground was damp from morning dew, but I didn't care. I got promoted, Scott said. Warehouse supervisor. It's not much more money, but it's something. A step up. Your father would be proud. Would he? Yes. Not because of the promotion. Because you're taking responsibility. Because you're doing hard things. Because you're rebuilding. Scott nodded. We sat in silence for a while, the two of us and Robert's headstone. I wrote Megan a letter, he said finally. I didn't send it. I just needed to write it. To say all the things I never said. What did you say? That I was sorry for trying to be someone I wasn't. That I was sorry for dragging her down with me. That I hoped she'd be happy. He paused. And that I finally understood what Dad meant about wealth. That the richest thing I ever had was the two of you, and I threw it away chasing money. My eyes burned with tears. I haven't fully paid off the debts yet, he continued. But I'm close. Maybe another year. And I've been saving. Slowly. I'm thinking about getting my own place. Not right away. But eventually. There's no rush. I know. But I want to. I want to stand on my own. Properly this time. Not to prove anything to anyone else. Just to prove it to myself. We sat there until the sun got higher and the cemetery started to warm. Before we left, Scott touched his father's headstone gently. I'm trying, Dad. I'm really trying. On the drive home, I thought about how far we'd come. How far we still had to go. The relationship between Scott and me would never be what it was when he was 7, drawing pictures and helping his father plant gardenias. Too much had happened. Too much had broken. But maybe we were building something better. Something based on truth instead of illusion. Respect instead of obligation. Boundaries instead of endless sacrifice. My sewing students noticed the change too. Scott started joining us sometimes on Thursday evenings, helping set up chairs, making coffee. Lucy asked him about his job. Beatrice showed him photos of her grandkids. Carmen taught him how to thread a bobbin. Your mom's a warrior, Carmen told him one evening. You know that? Scott looked at me across the room. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. Eleanor pulled me aside later. He's doing well. He is. And you? How are you doing? I thought about it. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm learning that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I'm learning that boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations. Robert would be proud. I hope so. This spring, the gardenias bloomed again. The tomatoes grew strong and heavy. The roses Robert planted 20 years ago exploded with color. Scott and I worked in the garden together, not saying much, just tending the things that needed tending. Sometimes, when the light hits a certain way, I see Robert in Scott's movements. The way he kneels in the dirt. The way he handles the plants carefully. The way he talks to them. I don't know what the future holds. Scott might move out and build his own life. We might drift apart again, though I hope not. Or we might stay in this gentle equilibrium we've found, two people learning to love each other honestly instead of perfectly. What I do know is this love isn't about giving everything until you have nothing left. Love is about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. When to help and when to step back. When to sacrifice and when to protect yourself. Robert knew that. He tried to teach it to me. It took losing him and almost losing Scott to finally understand. I'm 69 now. The house is still mine. The garden still grows. My sewing students still come every week. Scott still lives in his old bedroom, working at the warehouse, paying off his debts, slowly rebuilding a life from ruins. And me? I'm learning to live with the complexities. With the fact that I can love my son and still maintain boundaries. That I can forgive him and still remember what happened. That I can be his mother without being his savior. Some days are harder than others. Some days I still want to fix everything for him. But then I remember Robert's words, let him fall. It's the only way he'll learn to stand. Scott is standing now. Shakily, but standing. And I'm standing beside him, not holding him up, just being present. Being his mother in the way he needs now, not the way I thought he needed before. That's enough. It has to be enough. The gardenias are blooming again outside my window. Their scent fills the house. Robert planted them for his mother, and now they bloom for both of us. A reminder that beautiful things can grow from difficult soil, that roots run deep even when the surface looks barren, that spring always comes if you're patient enough to wait. I'm still waiting, still hoping, still loving my son, but loving myself too. And that, I think, is what Robert wanted all along. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, it wasn't easy to live through either. But I wanted to share it because I know I'm not the only mother who's struggled with this. I'm not the only person who's had to learn that love and boundaries aren't opposites, they're partners. If my story helped you in any way, or if it made you think about your own relationships differently, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to Grandmama Radio and turn on notifications. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more voices that need to be heard. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you're allowed to say no, even to the people you love most. Especially to the people you love most.